Shalom. And I'll probably need to turn this fan off. You don't want to hear that while I'm talking. I hope those of you who had the Yom Kippur yesterday, you had a day of contemplating the slavery of Egypt. Whether or not you fasted is up to you because the Torah doesn't command fasting. Today I'm going to talk about the rapture because we all missed it. It happened on Saturday, the 23rd of September. I saw several Christians prophesy it happening, and I don't see them around me, so they must be gone. Time is running out, and you've already missed the rapture. You have to do it now. Wow, this sounds just like a bad sales pitch. I want to address the elephant in the room. No one who reads the New Testament, very few address this. The New Testament writings were clearly written for a first century audience. This is something nearly every apologist ignores. The traditionalists, the Paulinists, the Catholics, the anti-Paulinists, or the Messianics, which I didn't have here. There is, of course, an exception to this, and we'll be dealing with that at the end of the study. Every generalization has an exception. I speak with brevity because it grows near. Matthew 11. But to what shall I compare this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplaces who call out to other children. The Son of Man came and eating and drinking and saying, Behold, a gluttonous man and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners, yet wisdom vindicated by her deeds. Who is he talking to? That generation. That is how we know when Yesu again uses this phrase in the eschatological formation of the Gospel of Matthew. We know that he meant that generation. Mark 8:12. And sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, Why does this generation seek a sign? And truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. And this is quite interesting, given how some of you are so obsessed with signs and wonders. And he says that it is a wicked and adulterous generation that seeks those things. And I remember one of the people, he was a good brother, but he decided to curse me because I wanted to pursue Yahweh alone. And he told me that the fact that I can't do signs and wonders is a sign that God is not with me. No. If a prophet or a dreamer of dream arises among you, gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder comes true concerning, and this is important, the sign or the wonder comes true concerning which he spoke to you, saying, Let us walk after other gods whom you have not known, let us serve them. You shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For Yahweh your Elohim is testing you to find out if you love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and all your soul. You shall walk after Yahweh your Elohim and fear him. You shall keep his commandments, and his, not the other guy in the New Testament. Listen to his voice, serve him, cling to him. Did judgment happen? Did it happen on September 23rd? The men of Nineveh will stand up with this generation at the judgment and will condemn it because they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And this is important too. What did that generation do when Jonah came through and said, 40 days destruction's happening? Now the word of Yahweh came to Yehonah the second time, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and call out to it this very call which I am speaking to you. So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh according to the word of Yahweh. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, a 3 days walk. I've thought about that a great deal too. Like, What city today would be comparable to that? If I started walking at one end of the city and it took 3 days to get to the other end, even a large city like New York, I don't think it would take 3 days to walk across. Then Jonah began to go into the city 1 day's walk, and he called out and said, 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. And the people of Nineveh believed in God. And this is important. They believed in God, not in the messenger. And they called out for a fast to put on sackcloth from the greatest to the least of them. Then the word reached the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne, laid aside his mantle and covered himself, and put himself on sackcloth and sat on the ashes. And he cried out and said, in Nineveh, by the decree of the king and his noble, do not man, animal, herd, or flock taste a thing. Do not let them eat. Do not let them drink water. Both man and animal must be covered with sackcloth, and let men call on God with their strength, that each may turn his hands from his evil way and from the violence which is in his hands. They don't turn to Yeshua. And even in this statement to the Pharisees, he wasn't telling them to believe in him. He's pointing back to what happened in Nineveh, that at the preaching of Jonah, they turned from their wicked ways and repented, turned back to God. His condemnation of that generation, and why would he speak like this to them? Because he, like every other New Testament author, preached of an imminent coming of judgment. Imminent. Matthew 23:36, truly I say to you that all these things will come upon this generation. Did all those things happen upon that generation? No. Shall not pass away. And this is an important statement. Matthew 24:34. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away. And the millennialists twist this passage so much to keep their pretext true. But the passage is clear. It's not talking about a race of people. He was talking to those people. He said, you will not pass away until all these things take place. But to keep your futurist interpretation, you have to pervert the text. The futurist interpretation of this completely skewed. Every time he uses it, it was about that generation in the past that he was speaking to, and the same is true here. He was speaking to his disciples, telling them of his imminent return. Why do you think they were willing to do this? Acts 4:32. The congregation of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and not one was saying that any of his possessions was his own, but for them everything was common. They sold everything, as the end of all things was at hand. They believed it in their hearts, and this is the position preterists take today. Doesn't this validate John over Matthew, Mark, and Luke? And this could be an argument from an interlocutor who is anti-Pauline and uses the Pauline writings of John's gospel for their faith. And yes, John is the most Pauline of all of the four messages. The fact that John's gospel is missing any sort of eschatology surrounding Jerusalem, it was him talking to a Samaritan woman about not worshiping in Jerusalem. It is definitive proof against John and his gospel message. How? When it didn't happen, and this is a witness one against the resurrection happening early on, early Christians included two books that were canonized, started to reassure their congregates that it was still going to happen. We even see this in Paul's writings, which points it to being a later writing after Paul died. A post-Pauline pastoral epistle, 2 Timothy 2:18, who have swerved from the truth, saying that the resurrection has already happened. And you can see, even in the first century, there were people already saying this, that, the resurrection happened. But where was the king? Because every prophecy says when the resurrection happens, he's going to come from the clouds and reign over Jerusalem. That didn't happen. And there were some in the early second century teaching the same thing that preterists teach today, that the resurrection happened. And some of them who are full preterists teach this. The problem is described in the second stanza. If the resurrection happened, then you have no hope. And we'll get to the reason this is a huge issue as we go on. Be saved from that crooked generation. Acts 2:40. But with many other words, he solemnly bore witness and kept on exhorting them, saying, be saved from this crooked generation. Who was Peter speaking to? Was he speaking to you? No, he was speaking to that generation. This is why he quoted from Joel 2 and said, for this men are not drunk as you suppose, for it is the third hour of the day, but this is what is spoken through the prophet Joel. And what is the prophecy from Joel? As he quotes or misquotes 2:17, and it shall be in the last days, God says that I will pour out my spirit on all mankind, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall see dreams. So let's now go to that. This is what Peter misquoted about the last days. Now, the way Peter misquoted this passage makes it clear. Peter believed they were living in the last days. Joel 2:28, however, says this, and it will be afterwards, not in the last days, that I will pour out my spirit on all mankind, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men will dream dreams, and your young men will see visions. But this wasn't what Joel was saying. In fact, this prophecy was not even about the first century. It was about the exiles of Babylon. The coming destruction prophesied of in Joel, to the people reading this writing, we're going to have to wait until after they died and have their great grandchildren take the passage out of context to be about Yeshua. The Pauline dilemma. Paul also taught of an imminent return. Romans 13:11, and that knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. 1 Corinthians 7:29. But this I say, brothers, the time has been shortened, so that from now on those who have wives should be as though they had none. Then 2 Corinthians 1:10, who rescued us from so great a peril of death, and will rescue us, he on whom we have set our hope, and he will yet rescue us. And this is something else I want to eventually make a study on. It's like the idea of being saved that Christianity teaches you today is completely skewed from what the text actually teaches. Every author of the New Testament believed that salvation was a future event, not that you were presently saved. If I could type. He who has believed and has been immersed shall be saved. See the difference? It's not that you are presently saved. You shall be saved. And this is all throughout the New Testament. Romans 5:9. Much more than having been justified by his blood, we shall be saved from the wrath of God through him. See, this is the messaging you miss because you believe you are saved. And this is where the extreme error of eternal security comes from. And this is because, again, of the Johannine writings that are completely amplifying the Pauline message. The Johannine writings are where the idea that you are presently saved comes from. But these are not inspired by God. Galatians 6:9, let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we will reap. See this message here? You will. Oops, what is that? You will reap if we do not grow weary. Not that you have presently reaped eternal life, as the Johannine epistles and gospel teaches. You don't have it yet. You have to not lose heart in doing good. This is what he's teaching you. And Paul wasn't talking to us either. He was talking to that generation. He was talking to his first disciples in the first century. He promised them, like Yeshua, that they would not taste death, that some of them would be alive when the return happens, which is why the pseudepigrapha of Second Peter exists, and why it talks about both Paul and the second coming, things that had to have happened at least 50 to 80 years after the writings of Paul. What about Revelation? Indeed, what about the great mysteries of iniquity? The revelation of Yesu, which God gave him to show his slaves the things which must soon happen. And he indicated this by sending through his angel to his slave John, who bore witness to the word of God and to the witness of Yesu, to all that he saw. Blessed is he who reads, for these who hear these words of prophecy and keep the things which are written in it, for the time is near. Not 2,000 years later. And he said, do not seal up the words of this prophecy, for the time is near. He who bears witness to these things says, I am coming quickly. Amen. So the answer is right there. The thing he wrote must soon happen. But it didn't. Which is why in 22:10, do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book. Seal them up for a later generation, as the time was near. And the last sentence from himself, I am coming quickly. And this is why preterism exists. It is a way to make the idol a true prophet and follow his false teachings. Okay, I know we can trust Yaakov, the brother. First, James 5:7. Yeah, the sun doesn't know the hour, but apparently all these futurists believing in the rapture do know the hour. It's September 23rd. And check this out. They've been prophesying this for years. September 23rd, September 23rd, September 23rd, 2019, 2015, 2017. And I saw several of them prophesying of 2023. It's like, okay, have any of them repented for being wrong? Have any of them? I mean, that's the punishment for falsely prophesying. But the prophet who speaks a word presumptuously in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or which he speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. Now you may say in your heart, how will we know the word of which Yahweh has not spoken? And when a prophet speaks in the name of Yahweh, if the thing does not come about or come true, that is the thing which Yahweh has not spoken. Well, it didn't come true, and yet here they still are, not repenting and still prophesying of it being in the future. Are you ready for the September 23rd, 2015 rapture? Well, oh, I missed this one. Christ returns May 21st, 2011. I wonder if that guy repented. Oh, and good old post dispensationalists, anti-Semite here, Robert Breaker, September 23rd, 2017, September 23rd, 2015. This guy's never repented of falsely prophesying. He just keeps pushing it into the future. James 5:7, therefore be patient, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. Behold, the farmer waits for the precious fruits of soil, being patient about it until he receives the early and late rains. Who is James talking to? To the people he wrote to, the Jews in diaspora. That is the context. Not you, not me, not anyone outside the first century. Look at the next verse. You too be patient. Strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. If it's at hand, it had to have happened if it was true. And the coming of Yeshua is at hand. It's not delayed. The time is nearing. I can live without Paul, without the synoptics. We have John and Jude. 1 John 2:18. Children, it is the last hour. And just as you heard the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have appeared. From this we know it is the last hour. This we know it is presently now the last hour. Jude 1:17 to 18. But you, beloved children, must remember the words which are spoken beforehand by the apostles of Yeshua, that they were saying to you, in the last time there will be mockers following after their own godly lust. And he's clearly talking about that time. And Jude also firmly believed they were living in the last time, in the last hour. So now we're going to deal with some other facts. Why preterism doesn't solve these problems. Why the resurrection happened in the first century. It doesn't solve any of these problems. And we can prove from the writings the Romans canonized that it didn't yet happen. The third witness, 2 Peter 3:4, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all continues just as it was from the beginning of creation. The fathers are those who started the faith of following the man. And in fact, another line in this epistle points to it being written in the mid to late 2nd century. And consider the patience of our Lord salvation, just as our beloved brother Paul, according to the wisdom given him, wrote to you in all his letters, speaking in them these things which are some hard to understand, which the untaught and unstable distort, as they do the rest of the writings, to their own destruction. Enough time had passed that Paul's writings had been collected into some sort of canon. In fact, the person twisting them when this was written was likely Marcion, who created a collection of Paul's writings in 150 AD. So I firmly believe 2 Peter is written against Marcion. As pseudepigrapha of Peter. There was no resurrection, no millennial kingdom, because, he could have set this straight, right? Yeah, the Trump prophecies that he was going to win in 2020 as well, brother. But the millennial kingdom happened, and this is what I've heard to defend the idolatry as well. It is an idol. It already happened, right? That now we are in Satan's kingdom, the deception, the lie. That's why you can't trust the Bible anymore. Oh. It is sad what people will do to defend their idolatry and refuse to throw out all of the New Testament, return to Yahweh alone. Revelation 27, and when the 1,000 years are finished, Satan will be released from his prison. That's the only passage about this supposed era. Satan was released after 1,000 years. He's not given hundreds of years. What happens during this time that only the New Testament talks about, and only one book in the New Testament. And it will come out to deceive the nations, which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together for the war. And the number of them is like the sand of the seashore. And they came up on the broad plain of the earth, surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. Are the saints in the beloved city? Because, this doesn't say that when Satan is released, Yeshua disappears. No, the city is still there. And fire came down from heaven and devoured them. And this isn't something that's going to take even a couple of years if you read this prophecy literally. The devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are also, and they are tormented day and night forever and ever. Nothing about this points to a lengthy period of time. But secondly, he's still in the city. He doesn't leave the chosen city of Jerusalem during the release of Satan. The saints and he remain there, waiting for Satan to attack. And then the fire and brimstone come down and rain on the beast and the false prophet, saying the millennial reign happened. It doesn't solve the New Testament false prophecies. Prophecy written for the people reading it. Isaiah 53:1. Who has believed our report? See this? This is clear. This isn't talking to a future generation of reading Isaiah 53. And to whom has the arm of Yahweh been revealed? And I want to discuss this in a future study, as many people fleeing the New Testament decide that there is no importance in the prophets and the writings. I do believe that Tanakh as a whole is important, but I'm Also different from many of those who flee the New Testament. I do believe the New Testament is important, reaching those still stuck in it, who has believed our report. And this statement shows the immediacy of Isaiah's statement that it was not written for some future generation as a warning of what will happen 700 years later. And the same is true of the New Testament writings. They were written for that generation to believe in an immediate return. It didn't happen, and it didn't happen. Why? Because Yahweh hates human sacrifice and hates the consumption of blood. These are the two key underlining points of the New Testament. He would never use these images for your redemption. Fight Yahweh, and he will redeem your soul. Micah 6:6-8. With what shall I come before Yahweh, and bow myself before the God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with yearling calves? Is Yahweh pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression? If he's saying no to this, then why would he approve his own firstborn? It's not logical. The fruit of my body for the sin of my soul. He has told you, O man, what is good. Is what good? To believe on the firstborn son dying for the transgression of your soul? No. What does Yahweh require of you? To do justice, love loving kindness, to walk humbly with your Elohim. Yahweh not only repeatedly tells us that the sacrifice of our innocent sons and daughters is an abomination, he tells us it is not required to be reconciled to him. What does he require? Do what is Zedekah. What is Zedekah? Guard Torah. Deuteronomy 6:24-25. Love Hesed. What is Hesed? It is what she shows us that obey his 10 words, Exodus 26. And what he expects us to show to others. Waksana, to be like Moses. When someone confronts you, fall on your face. Don't confront them. Don't let the animal man in your heart out. And this is one of the things Father has recently showed me, because Paul teaches, the spirit is against the flesh. Those who walk in the spirit will not fulfill the desires of the flesh. It's completely backward. Completely. So check this out. Your heart is your basis for where your soul, your ephemera, lives. The heart is more deceitful than all else, and is desperately sick. Who can know it? If you let your heart lead your flesh will sin. And this is what, God tells Cain in the very beginning. Then Yahweh said to Cain, why are you angry? See, anger comes from where? From the soul, from the heart. And why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? If you do well, what is that? Action, the flesh, self-control. If you do not do well, sin is lying at the door, and it's desirous for you, but you must rule over it. What is he saying? That the flesh must rule over the spirit. And even the New Testament says this, and this is one of the things that proves that it's not all the same belief. Because this is what the book of James, or his name is Jacob, says about sin. Blessed is the man who blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted, and when he is carried away, enticed by his own lust. Not by demons, not by your flesh. It begins here, in the heart, in your soul. And I'm going to show you exactly why this is true. Then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin has fully matured, it brings forth death. See, when you let the desires of your heart rule over your flesh, then you will die the second death. This is why the prophets tell you what, and I will give them one heart and give within them a new spirit. See, our existing spirit is flawed with desires that are against God. And I will take the heart of stone, and this is important as well. Check this out. So your heart is of stone, your spirit is stone, and they're out of their flesh, and give them what? A heart of flesh. Now that is very interesting. See, the heart that is not against God is made of what? It is made of flesh. Now that's something interesting, isn't it? Why would God give you something that Paul says is against the spirit? The New Testament believers, that they go around like highly emphasizing Paul, and the reason they can't break free of sin is they have no self-control. They believe that, they just have to keep going into spirit, praying, fasting, whatever, and eventually the spirit will reign over the flesh. But it doesn't, because the spirit is reigning over the flesh. Their desires come from their spirit. It's so twisted. And they believe eventually God is going to give me the self-control to stop drinking, to stop looking at porn, to stop breaking the vow I made to Yahweh. Our heart has to be pulled out and replaced with a heart that is after Yahweh alone. And then you will have the ability to fully have that self-control. In the meantime, if your spirit is lusting after something you know is against God, then you have to exercise what he told Cain. If you do well, right? So when that desire hits, stand up and do well. I remember doing this several years back when I was really deep in my addiction to porn. And I glorify Yahweh for giving me this, I would go down to the mission and volunteer to help the homeless. I don't say this to glorify myself either. He helped me to do that. And that action, that doing well, gave me the self-control to rule over my desires. If you're not doing well, then sin is going to remain at the door, and eventually, you're going to hear the knock and let it in. Behold, sin stands at the door and knocks. If anyone hears its voice and opens the door, he will come into him, dine with him, and he with me. And then sin will rule over you. I hope you all have a great week. And may we remove the stumbling stone from our soul that keeps us from obeying the commandments of Yah. Shalom.